this morning. We know in a lot of areas of the U.S. and other places, harvest is in full swing, so or close to being in full swing. So we do appreciate it, and we hope you gain something. And please do ask, type in questions in the chat box so we can answer them as we go along. We're going to spend a majority of this morning as webinar time just discussing the importance of clean yield data and why it's so important. So we got a few summary slides, a few take-home points, and then we'll actually go through an example and to illustrate how important it is. And then we won't spend much time about the initial interpretation of the yield data. That's kind of goes together with those first initial steps of cleaning that yield data. So when we think about why clean yield data is so important, and I've used this slide quite a few times, when we do any kind of precision, precision ag related management decisions where we include yield data, there's basically five steps: collecting the data, interpreting the data, making decisions with that data, and then implementing that plan. And maybe one of the most important things is to evaluate the results at the end of the year to see what could be improved, what we did right, what we did wrong. But the first step that's maybe the most critical step is collecting that clean yield data, or cleaning that yield data after it is collected. And something that we'll try to drive home today is that the importance magnified for trials, on-farm trials, large strip trials, or smaller plots where you use combine yield data. It's very important to utilize the clean yield data in those trials. One thing that we won't talk about today is the calibration. We've actually covered that last year about this time in a webinar. So of course the calibration step is important. Data management is important, but the data cleaning, that third step in that initial collect data process is no doubt the most important as you move forward into evaluating your treatments or your management zones or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so Chad, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you here for a moment and pull up the first registration question that you all answered when you signed up for the webcast. And that question was asking you all, what best describes how you and your clients clean your yield monitor data? And so you see the options below there, and I'll go ahead and pull up those results. So looking at the pie chart, it looks like the majority of you either are not cleaning your client's yield data or are using an automated cleaning tool in one of those major farm management software. And Chad's going to briefly describe his approach to cleaning yield data, particularly for fields where he ran some kind of trial or test like he was just mentioning with one of his growers. And that's using the ARS Yield Editor tool, which it looks like a few of you are already using as well.
All right, thank you, Ben. Yeah, that is quite surprising. The number, I guess, nearly a third of us really don't spend that much time cleaning yield data, and that may be from we're actually not actively using that in making management decisions yet. But it's always still, even in that situation, it's important because eventually you will use that yield data when you do start variable rate seeding or fertilizer or whatever it may be. So just a quick few points here. Like I said, yield file cleaning is a critical step, especially for those more advanced analysis, which we'll show you and actually go through an example here in a little bit. And then, like Ben indicated, a lot of us are using just the general cleaning techniques in some of the software, whether it be SMS or SST Summit or Map Shots, which is not always bad, but most oftentimes those are just deleting points less than a certain bushel and greater than a certain bushel or pounds per acre. And oftentimes what I see is that we really don't know, in some of those software packages, we really don't know what's happening. Because some of it's done automatically without us doing anything, and some of it has to do some of it has to be done manually in certain packages. But I guess the take-home message there is that if you do use those software packages, know what it's doing, know what points it's removing, and then also ask and see what the defaults are set for. That can have a huge influence on trial outcomes and what points are being removed from those fields. So, like Ben indicated previously, I'm a big fan of the ARS Yield Editor for cleaning and filtering yield data files. Some of the things, and we're not going to go through this. Actually, the video that Ben has recorded that you'll receive at the conclusion or shortly after the conclusion of the webinar will kind of have a more in-depth details about cleaning and filtering using the Yield Editor tool. The thing I like about this tool is that you really have the ultimate power, or can have the ultimate power, as far as what factors, whether it be flow delay, max velocity, min velocity, min-max yield, things like that you can set your parameters, and then also you can toggle back and forth to see what points it deletes, how many points it will delete. So you really have power to clean that yield data. And if you don't feel comfortable with some of those things, there is an automated option that will kind of do that for you.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I had a question come in that was sort of along the lines of what you were just mentioning. I thought I'd interject here. And the question was, how often do you use Yield Editor to clean those yield files versus bring it into a more automated tool like some of those software you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ben. Typically, any time we ever will have a trial on that field where that yield data came from, we will always run that data through the Yield Editor, and then we try to do as many, I guess what you would call normal fields. Especially if we're evaluating management zones on, say, some newly created management zones in a field, we will always try to run that data through there as well. So probably I would say out of the data that we collect, probably 25 to 35% of it will run through the Yield Editor program in a given year, and the rest will just run through our typical general cleaning, I guess you could say.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for answering that, Chad. I'll let you continue there.
Okay, nope, I think that pretty much wraps that slide up. I just wanted, and most of you, I mean, almost 10% of you were already using this tool. So a lot of you are familiar with it, or I'm sure you've seen it in the past. And it is a free download from the ARS, so it is easily accessible. So just to summarize, our typical cleaning flow at the end of the year, or once we download or obtain the grower's data, FOV Viewer is, and most of you guys or people are probably familiar with that, is available from Mapshots for free download. We'll read those yield files with FOV Viewer into Yield Editor. And then into the data management software. So it does create an extra step. However, we don't see that it takes a significant amount of time to take that extra cleaning step. So we think it's something that's definitely worthwhile. So just a quick summary on the cleaning, and then we'll actually get into to our example that I indicated earlier. And something that we didn't talk about, but initially check your data after the first few days of harvesting, since all of us are probably just recently get started with harvesting or will here in the near future, and then back up as often as possible. And this is getting easier and easier with remote access or download capability. So just can't recommend that enough. Just make sure you're collecting that good quality data often. And then, like I said, tips, for simple yield cleaning, the FOV viewer and yield editor, especially with the on-farm trials. And I did say it does have a standard filter setting for some basic cleaning that you can use if you don't feel comfortable with setting each of those parameters yourself. And then spend time on, on that cleaning. It's very important.
Great, yeah, and that's a good segue to that second registration question that you all answered when you signed up for the webcast, and that was asking, which best describes how you or your clients use your yield monitor data. And you see the options that you had to choose from down below, and I'll pull those results here. And so it looks like most of you are analyzing your customers' yield data by seeing how performance varied on average by different factors. And next we're going to look at an example of the yield trends before and after cleaning, first by evaluating the yield by those averages, and then by looking at it with a more advanced statistical method, which would be analyzing that field with our precision yield analysis software, AgVeritas. And so this slide kind of introduces you to the field that we're going to be examining and the trial setups that Chad put out. And so, Chad, do you want to walk the audience through what you had out in this field this last season?
Yeah, sure thing, Ben. So we had basically had three components, two kind of on-farm trials, which happened to be the UAN trial and then the compost trial. We did that. The image on the left part of your screen is the management zones that we had delineated in the previous year. This was based on multi-year yield analysis from yield data that was obtained before any variable rate technology or variable rate applications were made. The UAN trial, we varied 7 gallons to 28.3 gallons per acre. And this was additional in on top of what that producer put on that field, so that you could view that as additional nitrogen. And then the compost trial we were evaluating was simply a compost versus no compost trial. And this was applied at about 5 tons per acre.
Great. So the next few slides are going to kind of summarize the different yield trends that we saw when we were looking at the field, comparing that clean and unclean yield data. And so this first one, I think, just kind of introduces you overall to that average yield and the variation in yield that we saw. And so, Chad, do you want to kind of point out what jumps out to you here?
Yeah, Ben. The big thing is looking at the yield variability is in bushels per acre. With the clean data, we had, yield variability from high to low of 191, and clean we had 219 bushels. So this is not surprising necessarily, but because we are removing a lot of those low yielding points and the high yielding points, so nothing surprising there. And actually, the average yield bushels per acre, the 264 with the clean data was right on with the scale tickets at the end of harvest. We are with cleaning that data, we are getting the actual field yield from that field.
Yeah, and then this next slide shows the rankings of those different data layers or variables that you had on the field and how strongly related they were to the yield or contributing to the variation that you saw in the yield from that year. And this is from when we ran those two clean and unclean through AgVeritas. And so, Chad, you want to kind of walk us through what you're seeing here or what takeaways you have from this?
Okay. The rank as far as the top factors that were included in the model, management zones elevation was relatively, stayed consistent between the clean and unclean data. Two of the things that stuck out, of course, if you looked at the kick out columns or the factors that were kicked out, with the clean data, the soil types were kicked out, whereas they were pretty high ranking in the unclean data set. But probably the most surprising thing is that in the uncleaned data set, we actually had some population check plots in that field that we didn't cover in the prior slide. But we actually had population check plots in there, and those actually got kicked out in the unclean data set. So if I was using that unclean data set, I would have thought that there was, or the model would have indicated to me that there was no population response. However, you can see that it was included in the clean data set. It ranked relatively low, but it was important or significant in determining final yield. So you can see, I mean, it's obvious the importance there. With the unclean data set, I would have said flat rate the field at 34,000, for example, because there was no population response. With the clean data set, however, there wasn't a range of population response based on those check plots. So just magnifies the importance of using the clean data.
Yeah, and then this next slide is looking at the yield averages in those different management zones that we showed on the map when we introduced the field. And so looking at the differences between that clean and unclean yield data, what's jumping out to you here, Chad?
I think the take-home thing here is, or the most surprising thing is the range or the difference in the low-yielding zones and the high-yielding zones. And perhaps I should explain the zones in the green cells across the top of the table. The 40 to 67%. That would be, you can think of that as normalized yield or historic yield average. So that would be 40 to 67% of the long-term field average is kind of the way you could view that. So you can see at the relatively low yielding zone from the 40 to 67, we had a 35 yield bushel difference, which is quite large. And then at the higher end, 106 to 121, we had 13 bushel a yield difference from the clean versus unclean data. You can see in the middle, you know, in those average zones, in the 85 to 105 zones there, you know, we weren't off as much from the unclean versus clean. But you can see how this would impact any kind of trial analysis, especially if you were evaluating trials or treatments in the low yielding zone or the high yielding zone. With that unclean data set, you definitely could get a false result.
Yeah, and then this next slide is looking at those different UAN check rates that you had on the field and comparing that clean and unclean. And so the differences here, they aren't quite as drastic as the management zones, but I think there's still some value in what we're seeing here. So Chad, you want to kind of unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, sure thing, Ben. Yeah, like Ben indicated, they're not quite as drastic as the management zones. But when we get into evaluating treatments, you know, most everybody knows that when we evaluate treatments, you know, on a large scale, oftentimes we're talking about a 1 or 2 bushel yield difference that we're trying to detect. So we still do have quite a range, you know, between those rates. You know, it varies from 10. That difference varies from 10 to 15 bushels per acre. So once again, depending on what rate you were looking at, you know, it had a greater impact on certain ones than others. So a 5 bushel yield difference is significant when trying to detect a 1 or 2 bushel difference.
Yeah, and Chad, I think the point is valid here too, as well as, you know, sometimes that bushel or 2 or 3 difference can be what matters, and, you know, whether putting that extra rate down was a profitable decision, or when you kind of put it into dollar terms, you know, it only maybe takes a bushel or 2 increase to justify that cost. And so I think that just kind of reinforces the point that even though that difference may not be as large as we were seeing in the management zones, it's still you know, significant in you know, deciding what investments you're going to make.
Yep, that's an excellent point, Ben.
Yeah, and so looking at the compost trial here and the trends that we see, I think it's kind of a similar narrative to that UAN study where, the difference here looks like, 2 bushels an acre maybe between the two, but it still may be, a significant, it may matter in terms of making that decision from an economic or investment standpoint. Is that kind of how you interpret this?
Yep, you're right on. There, like you can see, the difference was only 2 bushels, between the clean and the unclean. But in this case, it makes quite a big difference on return on investment, like we'll see on the following slides.
Yeah, and so here's actually a screenshot of the compost profit map from AgVeritas when we analyze this field. And this is looking at the unclean yield data. And I'm going to do a quick demonstration of AgVeritas at the end of the webcast if you have a chance to stick around for a few minutes. But Chad, do you want to go ahead and explain what you see in the differences between the profit map results from clean and unclean analysis of that compost application? And I can toggle kind of, the next slide is the clean image, so I can toggle back and forth as you want.
Okay. Yeah. Just a quick description of this image without going into too much detail. Basically, the darker green areas has a higher return on investment than the lighter green areas or the blue areas. So the blue areas are based on or a 50 to 100% return on investment, which is still pretty good, and most producers would think that's fine. But if we just concentrate on the dark green areas, which are over a 200% return on investment, and this is given a crop price of $3.75, compost application cost kind of prorated at $10 per acre over several years. Those were the inputs that we put in to determine this return on investment. And then, so yeah, Ben, if you want to go ahead and click on the next slide, the clean data, you'll notice that all that blue area and light green area turns to the dark green, which is over 200% return on investment. So you can see how just that, and if you recall, it was only 2 bushel yield difference between that. So we're doubling. Basically, the data would suggest. The clean data would suggest, we're getting over a 200% return on investment on at least a third of that field. So yeah, Ben, if you want to toggle back and forth 1 or 2 times so they can see the difference. So it just magnifies the point of how important, I guess, for every bushel is, especially when it comes to evaluating trial results on the field scale. So to summarize, and I think we've driven it home a little too much or beaten it a little too much, but we can't emphasize enough the clean that yield data. When you guys input yield data into AgVeritas or whatever it may be, you're going to get better results. And basically that's the outcome of using clean results. You get clean, clear, precise results. So you can say, yes, this treatment worked, or no, this treatment didn't. So it clarifies those questions at the end of the year. And that's oftentimes what we see is when we don't have a clear conclusion at the end of the year, it's most often due to poor data, and oftentimes that's just not cleaning it quite enough. So. Ben, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chad. And I think that kind of wraps up what Chad was going to cover today. And if you all have a few minutes, I'm going to quickly do a demonstration of AgVeritas, which you all saw some screenshots of during the webcast. And but before I jump in and look at the example of that seeding rate or plant population study on the field that we've been looking at during the webcast, I was going to give a quick overview of AgVeritas, what it is and how it works. And so it's a web-based yield analysis tool, so it's available out in the field with 3G or back at the desk if there's internet connection. And the way that it works is it uses a spatial statistics process to take all those factors that you have data for, whether it's a hybrid choice or a seeding rate, product applications, and also those field characteristics like soil types or elevation, nutrient levels from a soil sample. All that data that you have for a field that you think might have some kind of impact on the yield, we take all those factors and analyze them at the same time to determine which of them are impacting your yield more or less relative to each other. So you get that kind of diagnostic information about what's really driving yield for that field. And then ultimately what folks want to know, and what you saw some screenshots of earlier, is, is a certain investment choice or management practice profitable? And not just is it profitable, but where on the field can I see those returns and how much? And so that's at the core of the output that you guys will see as we dive in and look at that seeding rate trial. And so I'm going to take a look here at that seeding rate trial, and this kind of introduces you to the setup that Chad put out, where you see on that right-hand image, he ran some randomized checks in that northwest portion of the field, sort of starting with 32,000 and climbing up to 44,000. And that area of the field was flat rated this year, this season, with a 36,000 plant population. And so you can see that he had some low checks and some high checks in that area to ask that question, could we have saved the producer money by using a little less seed, or maybe push that rate higher and seen higher yields and higher return from that. And so I'll go ahead and pull up that analysis here so we can look at the results. It'll cooperate. There we go. And I'm going to sign in here to the live demo account. And this is going to pull up the results of that analysis. And so when you get the results from AgVeritas back on a trial or a field that you've analyzed, you get these 5 different pages of the results. And we sort of think of them or refer to them as a toolbox where, between these 5 pages, depending on the question that you're asking or the goal of that analysis, you can get to that answer by using one or a combination of these tabs. And so since this was a variable rate seeding trial, I'm going to jump over to this variable rate page here. And this is similar to some of those screenshots you saw of the compost application in the profit map page, where you're still going to enter in the commodity price. So I'll just put in 375 for corn. And then you select the rate layer that you want to analyze. And we're going to look at, what's that optimal rate in those different management zones that Chad had, that you've all saw the images of, since he had some well-defined management zones there. And then I'll put in the required return. And so that's just saying, some folks we talk to will say, if I can break even on the cost of that extra seed, I'm going to put it down. Other folks want a 10, 25% return above and beyond that cost of the extra seed. And so in this case, I'll put in 10%. And then I'll put in the different application prices for these are planting prices for these seeding rates. And then I'll hit calculate. And what's going to show on the map is rather than where in the profit map, each color on the map was a different return on your investment from applying that compost in that example, the different colors that you'll see are the optimal rate or the most profitable rate at that location. And so it looks like on most of the field that 32,000, or sort of the lowest check rate, was determined to be the most profitable or that optimal rate. But then there were some other areas here where we saw a higher response or a profitable response. to that 35,000 rate. And so, Chad, I'm curious. I know you looked at this field and did some analysis on your own. Is this kind of what you saw, or what kind of takeaways did you get from analyzing this field in this seeding rate trial?
Yeah, Ben, this is, yeah, I mean, given the year that we had in this year, or in that given year, we had, that reflects very closely to what, to what I found. Yep.
Okay, great.
And
so, yeah, well, I guess it was, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so it was flat rated at 36,000, so it looks like on some of the field it maybe could have been pulled back a little bit, and then other areas it was pretty darn close to that 36.
Yep, correct.
Great. Well, so that's the quick demonstration I wanted to show you all today of AgVeritas, and so that concludes the webcast. But in the post-event survey that you're all going to get when the webcast concludes, we'd really appreciate if you would take a minute and answer those questions. We really do pay attention and use it to continually improve this webinar series. And you also have an option if you want any more information about AgVeritas, where we can reach out to you and kind of give you a more in-depth look at the tool. And so we'd love to have that conversation as well. And so I'll end with that, and thank you all for taking the time during this busy time of year to tune in with Chad and I this morning. And Chad, thank you for taking the time and sharing your insights as well.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ben.
All right, everyone, have a good rest of your day. Thank you.